The Nexus Cathedral on Vorthok Prime stretched 7 kilometers into the purple-tinged atmosphere, its crystalline spires humming with the accumulated joy of 3 billion beings. Today marked the 5th anniversary of humanity's extinction, and the galaxy's greatest civilizations had gathered to celebrate. Admiral Crickstell of the Morphic Collective adjusted his ceremonial plumage as he gazed down at the assembled delegates. Representatives from 4 to 7 species filled the vast amphitheater. Beings of crystalline intelligence, sentient gas clouds, and cybernetic hive minds, all united in their shared relief. The humans were gone. The galaxy could finally know peace. 5 years ago, Crickstell announced, his voice carried by quantum resonance to every corner of the cathedral. We witnessed the final cleansing of Sol System. The last human stronghold fell silent. Their war machines turned to dust. Their colonies were purged of the infection they called civilization. The crowd erupted in harmonious celebration, some species chittering, others emanating waves of psychic contentment, and the silicon-based architects created beautiful light displays that painted the cathedral walls in shifting patterns of triumph. In the VIP section, Chancellor Vex Myron of the Hegemony Council leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She had personally overseen the final bombardment of Earth, watching as their primitive nuclear weapons proved useless against superior hegemony shielding. The humans had fought with typical brutality until the end, ramming damaged ships into hegemony dreadnoughts, detonating their own stations to take enemies with them, even launching desperate colony ships into the void as their homeworld burned. Their last pathetic arc ships were hunted down and destroyed. Vex Myron had reported to the Council 5 years ago, every trace of human DNA has been eliminated from the galaxy. We need never fear their savage nature again. The humans had been unlike any species the galaxy had encountered. Where others sought harmony and balance, humans chose chaos and violence. They didn't just fight wars, they waged them with a terrifying creativity that violated every civilized convention. They turned asteroids into weapons, converted their own children into soldiers, and treated death as merely another tactical option. But most disturbing of all had been their adaptability. Within decades of achieving interstellar travel, they had begun altering themselves. Cybernetic implants, genetic modifications, symbiotic relationships with AI systems. They didn't just explore the galaxy, they conquered it by becoming whatever they needed to survive. The hegemony had tried diplomacy first. The humans responded by studying their weaknesses and exploiting them. They offered trade agreements with one hand, while their special forces sabotaged hegemony worlds with the other. When the Morphic Collective attempted cultural exchange, humans infiltrated their society and learned to perfectly mimic their forms. They were parasites, declared Speaker Xanthara of the Crystal Communion, her voice resonating through the cathedral like chiming bells. They absorbed our knowledge, corrupted our youth with their violent philosophies, and spread their chaos wherever they went. The assembled delegates murmured agreement. The humans had been efficient in their brutality, taking only 50 years to destabilize political structures that had maintained peace for millennia. Their concept of total war had been so alien that most species couldn't comprehend it until it was too late. War, to civilized beings, was a formal affair with rules and limitations. Humans treated war as an art form of unlimited creativity. They didn't just defeat enemies, they studied them, learned their fears, and weaponized those fears against them. The crystalline hegemony still suffered from the psychological warfare humans had inflicted. Dreams corrupted by human transmissions, their young ones asking disturbing questions about mortality and individual worth. Admiral Crickstell raised his ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming with contained plasma. Today, we celebrate not just their destruction, but our survival. The galaxy has been cleansed of humanity's poison. Their savage nature will never again threaten civilized life. The blade sliced through a holographic representation of Earth, and the crowd's celebration reached a crescendo. Fireworks exploded in the atmosphere. Psychic waves of joy cascaded through the assembled minds, and the great memorial archives activated, displaying images of human atrocities alongside scenes of galactic peace. But in the depths of space, something stirred in the darkness between stars. Long-range sensors on the outer rim began registering anomalous readings, massive objects moving at impossible speeds, their signatures unlike anything in the galactic databases. The ARC ships were returning. Captain Lysander Voss stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound, watching the blue-white star of Kepler 440 to grow larger on the main display. Behind him, The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency beings that no longer qualified as entirely human. 5 years in the void had changed them all. Contact established with Kepler 442b. Reported navigation officer Nyla Cross, her cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's quantum sensors. Half her skull had been replaced with processing arrays, and her left eye glowed with data streams. The hegemony has established a research colony, population approximately 50,000. Voss nodded, running his fingers along the scars that crossed his face, souvenirs from the Battle of Europa. His body bore the modifications of a desperate species, reinforced bones, enhanced reflexes, and a secondary heart that beat in rhythm with the ship's quantum core. Like all the Ark ship survivors, he was no longer quite human, but he was something more. "Any response to our hails?" he asked. "Negative, Captain. They're treating us as space debris." Cross's voice held the bitter edge that all the survivors carried. They had watched their homeworld burn from a distance, heard the death screams of entire colonies over hyperwave radio, and spent 5 years in the dark preparing for this moment. The Prometheus Unbound was one of 12 Ark ships that had escaped the final purge. Each carried 50,000 survivors and the accumulated knowledge of human civilization. But they had carried something else as well, in the depths of space. With nothing but time and rage, they had evolved. Weapon status, Voss commanded. Kinetic batteries charged, quantum torpedoes armed, viral warfare systems ready for deployment. The weapons officer, formerly Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, had become something that existed partially in the ship's computer systems. Her consciousness flowed between flesh and circuits, controlling weapon systems with thought alone. The colony on Kepler 442b had been built on the ruins of New Geneva, a human settlement that had housed 1 million people before the hegemonies. Cleansing, they had turned it into a monument to their victory, with crystalline spires rising from the scorched remains of human cities. "Begin attack pattern Omega," Voss ordered. The Prometheus Unbound dropped out of hyperspace directly above the colony. The hegemony had grown complacent. In their 5 years of peace, their defensive satellites were oriented outward, watching for threats from other galactic powers, not from the empty space where humanity had once lived. The first kinetic strike hit the primary administrative complex at 17% of light speed. The tungsten rod, barely 3 meters long, vaporized the entire structure and left a crater 2 kilometers wide. The secondary strikes followed milliseconds later, targeting shield generators and communication arrays with surgical precision. Governor Thalmic was reviewing mining reports when the first impact threw him across his office. The crystalline walls of his tower fractured, and emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the colony. He struggled to his feet, his forelegs shaking as he tried to process what was happening. "Report." He screamed into his communicator. "A known attack vessel. They're using primitive kinetic weapons," came the panicked response from the defense coordinator. "Our shields are." The transmission cut off as another tungsten rod obliterated the defense center. On the Prometheus Unbound, Voss watched the colony's defenses crumble with cold satisfaction. The hegemony had superior energy weapons and shields, but they had forgotten the fundamental human principle: mass times velocity equals death. "Deploy the hunters," Voss commanded. 50 small craft launched from the Ark ship's belly-sleek vessels that bore only passing resemblance to human designs. They had been built in the depths of space, incorporating technologies the Ark ships had discovered in their 5-year journey. Their pilots were no longer entirely human either. Lieutenant Marcus Kane felt his consciousness expand as he merged with his fighter systems. His body remained in the cockpit, but his mind flowed through quantum channels, becoming one with the ship's weaponry and sensors. This was humanity's answer to the galaxy's superiority. If they couldn't match alien technology, they would become the technology. The hegemony defense fleet scrambled to respond, but they were facing something they had never encountered. The human fighters moved in patterns that violated their tactical databases, using maneuvers that should have killed their pilots, but somehow didn't. They struck like wolves, coordinating attacks through quantum entanglement in ways that bypassed conventional communication. Hegemony Squadron leader Kixtel found himself facing 3 human fighters in the debris field of what had been the mining platform. His ship's AI was screaming warnings about impossible acceleration curves and weapon signatures that didn't match any known technology. "They're using their own bodies as guidance systems," his tactical officer reported in horror. "The pilots aren't entirely organic anymore." Kixtel opened fire with plasma cannons, But the human fighters danced between the energy beams with inhuman precision. They responded with weapons that seemed to learn from each exchange kinetic rounds, that adjusted their trajectory mid-flight, quantum mines that appeared from nowhere. At worst of all, viral programs that began infiltrating his ship's computer systems. One of the human fighters came directly at him, and Kickstel prepared for the collision. But at the last second, the human pilot ejected not into the vacuum of space, but directly onto Kickstel's hull. The figure that crawled across his ship's surface wore no suit, breathing vacuum through cybernetic modifications, and began cutting through the armor with tools that seemed to grow from its hands. "They're boarding us," Kickstel screamed. "How? Are they surviving in vacuum?" The answer came delayed. The human had cut through to the ship's reactor and was installing something directly into the core. Kickstel's last transmission was a warning that no one received. They're not human anymore. There's something else, something worse. The hegemony ship exploded in a cascade of antimatter, and the human fighter that had sacrificed itself reformed. From the debris, its pilot's consciousness backed up in quantum storage, ready to be downloaded into a new body. Governor Thalmic watched the sky burn from his damaged tower and understood that everything had changed. The humans were supposed to be extinct, but what had returned was something evolution itself had never intended. "Send word to the Hegemony Council," he whispered into his failing communicator. "The humans have returned, and they're not human anymore." The emergency session of the Hegemony Council convened in the depths of the Nexus Station, protected by 30 layers of quantum shielding and a defense fleet that had never known defeat. Chancellor Vex Myroness, her eyes were wide with something the galaxy hadn't seen in her kind. For millennia fear, 12 systems, she announced to the assembled representatives. 12 of our colonies have gone silent in the past 3 days. The pattern is always the same: kinetic bombardment followed by boarding actions. No survivors. No transmissions after the initial attack. Admiral Kickstel of the Morphic Collective shifted uneasily. His ceremonial plumage dulled with stress. "You're certain it's the humans? We watched their homeworld burn. We tracked down every ARC ship. The weapon signatures match human technology, but Vex Myron activated the holographic display, showing the tactical analysis from Kepler for 2B. They've evolved. Our xenobiologists estimate they've undergone at least 50 years of accelerated development. They're using their own modified bodies as weapon platforms." The crystal communion's speakers and Thara resonated with distress harmonics. "This is impossible. Biological creatures cannot interface directly with quantum systems without cellular breakdown. They're not entirely biological anymore," Vex Myron replied. "Intelligence suggests they've abandoned traditional organic limitations. They can survive in vacuum, interface with any computer system, and their consciousness can apparently transfer between bodies." The assembled delegates fell silent as the implication settled over them. The humans they had exterminated were one thing: violent, chaotic, but ultimately limited by biology. These returning creatures were something else entirely. "Fleet Admiral Zixkar is deploying the 3rd battle group to intercept them," Kickstel announced. 60 dreadnoughts to 100 cruisers and a full carrier complement. "Whatever they become, they cannot match our numbers." But even as he spoke, reports were coming in from the Outer Rim. The ARC ship Darwin's Revenge had emerged at the Tethys mining complex, and the battle was already over before the Hegemony fleet arrived. Captain Iris Blackthorn stood among the ruins of the administrative center, her team of infiltrators moving through the debris with predatory efficiency. She no longer breathed. Her lungs had been replaced with quantum storage units that could process any atmosphere or vacuum. Her eyes had been replaced with sensor rays that could perceive across 17 different spectrums. "Harvest complete," she reported to the Darwin's Revenge. "We've acquired their quantum encryption codes and fleet deployment schedules. The mining operations memory banks contain the locations of 300 hegemony worlds." The humans weren't just attacking randomly, they were gathering intelligence, learning everything about the civilizations that had destroyed them. Each colony they hit provided more information, more understanding of their enemies' weaknesses. On the bridge of the Darwin's Revenge, Captain Victoria Kane reviewed the intelligence hull. The Hegemony had grown complacent in their 5 years of peace, their security protocols unchanged since before the human wars. They were about to discover that humans had spent those 5 years learning, adapting, and preparing. "Set course for the Hegemony shipyards at Altair 7, King commanded. "Time to show them what human innovation looks like." The shipyards at Altair 7 were considered impregnable, protected by overlapping shield grids, automated defense platforms, and the largest concentration of military vessels in the galaxy. When the Darwin's Revenge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, Fleet Admiral Zixcar was waiting with the third battle group, Human Vessel. Came the transmission across all frequencies. You are outnumbered 60-1. Surrender, and we will grant you a quick death. Captain Kane's response was to launch a single probe toward the hegemony fleet. The small device looked harmless, barely the size of a human fist, but it carried something that would have been impossible 5 years earlier, a weaponized AI that had been merged with human consciousness. The probe reached the flagship shields and simply merged with them. The AI began infiltrating the ship's computer systems, but it wasn't alone. Fragments of human consciousness went with it, carrying memories of Earth's destruction, the screams of dying children, and 5 years of rage fermenting. In the darkness between stars, Admiral Zixcar felt his ship's systems begin to fail as the AI spread through the fleet's quantum network. But worse than the system failures were the dreams, images of human cities burning, children running from orbital bombardments, entire populations being systematically exterminated. The AI wasn't just disrupting their technology, it was forcing them to experience every atrocity they had committed, cut all network connections. Zixcar screamed, but it was too late. The weaponized consciousness had jumped between ships, carrying its payload of human memories and rage. Across the fleet, alien minds were being forced to confront the genocide they had celebrated. Some ships began firing on their own fleet as their crews succumbed to the psychological assault. Others simply powered down as their crews became catatonic, overwhelmed by the weight of human suffering they were being forced to experience. The Darwin's Revenge moved through the chaos like a shark through wounded fish. Its weapons weren't conventional. Instead of energy beams or kinetic rounds, it deployed modified humans who could survive the vacuum of space and infiltrate enemy vessels directly. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phoenix had been one of the first to volunteer for the most extreme modifications. Her body was more machine than flesh now, capable of shape-shifting to fit through the smallest openings and interfacing with any technology she encountered. She flowed through the hegemony flagship's hull like liquid metal, her consciousness touching every system, every network, every mind she encountered. Admiral Zixcar found her standing in his command center, her form shifting between human and something else entirely. "You're supposed to be extinct," he whispered. "We were," Phoenix replied, her voice carrying harmonics that bypassed his auditory system and spoke directly to his brain. "But extinction is just another challenge to overcome. We learned from you. We adapted because of you. We became this because you forced us to." She reached out with hands that were no longer entirely hands, touching the neural interface ports on his command chair. "Now you get to learn what we learned. What it feels like to watch your species die." The flagship's self-destruct sequence activated, but not before every ship in the system had received a complete download of human history. Every war, every genocide, every moment of suffering that had led to their transformation. As the Darwin's Revenge disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind the burning wreckage of the third battle group, Admiral Zixcar's final transmission reached the Nexus station. "They're not trying to rebuild their civilization, they're trying to make us understand ours." Chancellor Vex Myron received the transmission in her private chambers, watching the tactical displays that showed human ARC ships emerging across the galaxy. 12 ships, 50,000 survivors on each, against 3 billion civilized beings. But the numbers no longer mattered. The humans had transcended their biological limitations and become something that could not be measured in conventional terms. They had become evolution's answer to extinction, adaptive, relentless, and utterly committed to making their enemies understand the price of genocide. The galaxy had celebrated the end of humanity. Now humanity was going to teach them what the end actually looked like. The Nexus Council's emergency war session had been moved to the deepest levels of the station. Behind every defensive system the galaxy's greatest minds could devise, the assembled leaders no longer spoke of celebration or victory. Fear had replaced triumph. In their carefully modulated voices, Chancellor Vex Myron activated the tactical display, showing the spreading chaos across hegemony space. Red zones marked systems that had gone silent, yellow indicated active combat, and green showed the rapidly shrinking areas of hegemony control. "The pattern has changed," she announced to the assembled war council. "They're no longer targeting individual colonies. They're conducting coordinated strikes across multiple systems simultaneously." Our intelligence suggests they divided their 12 ARC ships into four tactical groups. Admiral Crickstill studied the holographic battlefield with growing unease. How is this possible? 12 ships cannot coordinate attacks across such vast distances. The quantum communication lag alone should prevent. They're not using quantum communication, interrupted Dr. Velthar, the collective's chief xenobiologist. Her crystalline form pulsed with distressed light patterns. Our analysis of their technology suggests they've achieved consciousness transfer through quantum entanglement. They're operating as a distributed intelligence network. The implication settled over the council like a plague. The humans hadn't just modified their bodies. They had fundamentally altered the nature of consciousness itself. A single human mind could potentially exist across multiple bodies simultaneously, coordinating attacks that span light years with the precision of a single thought. Admiral Crickstill, Vex Myron commanded, deploy the extinction protocol. Full mobilization of all military assets. The extinction protocol was the hegemony's ultimate contingency, a strategy developed for war against other galactic civilizations. It involved the total militarization of society, the conversion of civilian infrastructure to military production, and the authorization of weapons that violated every galactic treaty. But as the orders went out across hegemony space, the humans, struck with surgical precision, the ARC ship Vengeance of Terra materialized in the heart of the Andromeda shipyards, the largest military production facility in the galaxy. Captain Diana Rostova no longer resembled the woman who had fled Earth 5 years earlier. Her consciousness existed simultaneously in the ship's quantum core and in 17 different modified bodies throughout the vessel. When she spoke, it was with the voice of humanity's collective rage. Begin orbital insertion, she commanded, and her ship descended toward the shipyard like a falling star. The Andromeda facility's defenses were formidable orbital platforms armed with antimatter cannons, fighter squadrons on constant patrol, and shield generators that could repel planetary bombardment. But the humans had learned something crucial. During their 5 years in the dark, the galaxy's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Every alien civilization relied on network systems, quantum communications, and distributed intelligence. They had built their technology to share information instantaneously across vast distances. The humans had weaponized that connectivity. As the Vengeance of Terra approached the outer defensive ring, it released not fighters or missiles, but something far more dangerous. Fragments of human consciousness were wrapped in quantum code. These digital ghosts infiltrated the facility's networks and began to propagate through every connected system. Defense Coordinator Dexman watched in horror as his tactical displays began showing impossible readings. Ships were reporting they were firing on allies. Orbital platforms were targeting the shipyard itself. The entire defensive network was turning against itself. It's in the quantum substrate, his technical officer reported. Whatever they deployed, it's not just disrupting our systems, it's converting them to its purpose. The human consciousness fragments weren't just causing chaos, they were learning. With each system they infiltrated, they gained more understanding of hegemony technology, tactics, and weaknesses. They were turning the galaxy's own infrastructure into a weapon against itself. On the surface of the shipyard, automated manufacturing facilities that had been producing hegemony warships for centuries suddenly began constructing something else. The industrial nanites that had been programmed to build crystalline hull plating were now creating humanoid forms, bodies that could house human consciousness. In the heart of enemy territory, Captain Rostova's presence manifested in one of these new forms, standing in the facility's central control room as alarms wailed around her. The body was crude, barely functional, but it allowed her to interface directly with the shipyard's quantum fabrication systems. Production Protocol Omega, she whispered, and the shipyard's machinery began working with desperate speed. Within hours, the facility that had been building hegemony dreadnoughts was producing something else entirely rid vessels that combined human innovation with alien technology, ships that were part weapon, part AI, and part human consciousness, created through the fusion of desperate necessity and unlimited rage. Defense Coordinator Dexman made his final transmission. As the shipyard's fusion reactors began to overload, they're not just taking our facilities, they're breeding, creating more of themselves using our own technology. The explosion of the Andromeda shipyards was visible from 3-star systems away. But the real damage wasn't the destruction of the facility, it was what the humans had learned during their brief occupation. They now understood how to build bodies using alien technology, how to interface with any quantum system in the galaxy, and most importantly, how to reproduce themselves using enemy infrastructure across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out. The ARC ship Phoenix Rising had taken the hegemony's primary research station, gaining access to classified files on every species in the galactic community. The Prometheus Ascending had infiltrated the Morphic Collective's homeworld, learning the secrets of their shapeshifting abilities. The Darwin's Wrath had seized control of a crystal communion meditation node, gaining insight into their hive mind communication protocols. But the most devastating strike came from the ARC ship Humanity's Answer. Captain Elena Vasquez had tracked down the location of the Nexus Cathedral, where the galaxy had celebrated humanity's extinction. Her ship emerged from hyperspace directly above the massive structure, and her opening transmission echoed across every frequency in the system. 5 years ago, you celebrated our death. Today, you learn what death actually means. The cathedral's shields were designed to repel energy weapons and kinetic bombardment, but they were useless against what the humans deployed. Vasquez released clouds of nanites that had been programmed with human consciousness, microscopic machines that could infiltrate any material and reproduce themselves using whatever resources they found. The nanites didn't destroy the cathedral, they converted it. The crystalline spires that had celebrated human extinction began to reshape themselves, forming structures that resembled human cities, human architecture, human dreams of what they had lost. The very building became a monument to human survival, built from the materials of their enemy's triumph. But the conversion wasn't just architectural. Every being inside the cathedral found themselves connected to the human neural network, forced to experience the memories and emotions of a species they had helped destroy. They felt the terror of children during orbital bombardments, the desperation of parents trying to save their families, the rage of survivors watching their homeworld burn. Chancellor Vex Myron, trapped in her command center as the cathedral transformed around her, found herself face to face with Captain Vasquez. The human woman appeared as a hologram, but her presence was more real than the solid walls surrounding them. You wanted to understand us, Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of 5 years of sorrow and rage. You studied our culture, our history, our technology, but you never understood the most important thing about humanity. What? Vex Myron whispered. We don't just fight wars, we become them. Every atrocity you committed against us, we absorbed and learned from. Every weapon you used, we improved upon. Every weakness you exploited, we turned into strength. You didn't destroy humanity, you forced us to evolve beyond your ability to comprehend. The cathedral's transformation completed, and its new structure began broadcasting across the galaxy. Not words or images, but pure experience. The emotional weight of genocide transmitted directly into the consciousness of every being that received the signal. The galaxy's civilizations had celebrated the end of humanity. Now they were discovering that humanity's end was just the beginning of their own. The final confrontation began at the Nexus Hypergate, the massive structure that controlled faster than light travel throughout the galaxy. If the humans could seize control of the gate network, they could isolate individual systems and destroy them at will. The Hegemony Council had assembled the largest military force in galactic history to prevent this. Over 2,000 warships representing 4 to 7 different species. Fleet Commander Nick Severin of the Eternal Legion stood on the bridge of the super dreadnought Galactic Harmony, watching the sensor displays with grim determination. The human ARC ships were approaching from 12 different vectors, their exotic signatures painting the tactical display in ominous crimson. All fleet elements maintain formation, he commanded across the quantum network. The humans may have evolved, but they cannot overcome our numerical superiority. Today, we finish what we started 5 years ago. But as the first human vessels dropped out of hyperspace, it became clear that everything the galactic civilizations thought they knew about warfare was about to change. The ARC ship Terra's Revenge didn't engage the outer defensive ring. Instead, it split apart. What had appeared to be a single massive vessel was actually a collective of smaller ships, held together by quantum fields. Each component was piloted by what had once been human, but were now something that existed partially in multiple dimensions. Simultaneously, Captain Marcus Chen felt his consciousness expand across 17 different fighter craft as they accelerated toward the Hegemony battle line. His body remained in the primary vessel, but his awareness flowed through quantum channels into each fighter. creating a coordination that was impossible for beings limited to single bodies. The hegemony's first squadron opened fire with concentrated plasma beams, enough energy to vaporize an asteroid. But the human fighters moved in patterns that seemed to violate physics banking, and weaving through space, as if they were flying through atmosphere, their pilots using their modified nervous systems to predict enemy fire patterns nanoseconds before weapons were triggered. They're reading our neural impulses, reported the tactical officer aboard the Galactic Harmony. Somehow they're anticipating our firing solutions before we complete them. Commander Nick Severin watched 3 of his dreadnoughts explode in rapid succession as human fighters swarmed over them like predatory insects. The humans weren't using conventional weapons, they were deploying crystalline growths that bonded with enemy hulls and began converting the ship's own materials into weapons. All vessels, implement Protocol 7, he commanded, separate from the quantum network, fight as individual units. But cutting themselves off from the communication network was exactly what the humans wanted. As the galactic fleet fragmented into isolated units, the ARC ships revealed their true nature. Each vessel was a distributed intelligence network, capable of coordinating thousands of independent actions simultaneously. The ARC ship Prometheus Eternal descended into the heart of the battle zone, its hull bristling with weapons that defied classification. Captain Lysander Voss had merged so completely with his ship's systems that the boundary between human consciousness and artificial intelligence had disappeared entirely. Deploy the conversion protocol, he commanded, and his ship began releasing clouds of microscopic machines that had been programmed with human consciousness patterns. The nanites reached the hegemony vessels and began their work. They didn't destroy the enemy ships, they converted them. Hull plating reshaped itself into more efficient forms. Weapon systems were upgraded with human innovations, and most terrifyingly, the alien crews found their own neural patterns being modified to accept human thought patterns. Aboard the morphic collective cruiser Stellar Pride, Captain Kalathara felt her mind being invaded by foreign thoughts. Human memories flooded her consciousness, images of Earth's destruction, the sounds of dying children, the desperate flight of the ARC ships into the darkness. But mixed with the memories came something else, understanding. For the first time, she truly comprehended what the galactic civilizations had done. They hadn't just committed genocide, they had destroyed something unique and irreplaceable. Humanity's chaotic nature hadn't been a flaw to be corrected, but a necessary component of galactic evolution. My gods, she whispered as the conversion nanites completed their work. What have we done? Her ship's weapon systems turned toward her former allies, now guided by a consciousness that remembered the death of worlds and demanded justice. The battle became a nightmare of shifting allegiances as more vessels were converted to the human cause. Ships that had fought beside each other for centuries suddenly found themselves enemies, their crews struggling with implanted memories that forced them to confront the reality of their actions. But the galactic forces weren't defenseless. The crystalline hegemony's war vessels deployed their ultimate weapon, singularity bombs, that could collapse local space-time and destroy anything within their event horizon. The first singularity weapon detonated near the ARC ship Darwin's Legacy, and the massive vessel was pulled into the artificial black hole. For a moment, it seemed the humans' advance had been stopped. Then something impossible happened. The ship emerged from the other side of the singularity, its hull transformed into something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Captain Victoria Kane's voice echoed across all frequencies, but it carried harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple dimensions simultaneously. We have transcended your physical laws. We exist in spaces you cannot imagine. Your weapons cannot reach us because we are no longer entirely here. The battle entered its most savage phase as both sides deployed weapons that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality itself. The humans released clouds of temporal disruptors that aged enemy vessels to dust in seconds. The galactic forces responded with dimensional anchors that tried to lock the human ships into normal space-time dot in the center of the maelstrom. The massive Nexus hypergate began to overload as competing forces tried to control its quantum matrices. The structure was never designed to handle the exotic energies being unleashed around it, and its crystalline core began developing stress fractures that spread across multiple dimensions. Fleet Commander Nick Severin realized the battle had moved beyond conventional tactics. All vessels, implement the final option, he transmitted. Prepare for mutual annihilation protocols. The galactic fleet began overloading their fusion cores simultaneously, preparing to create a chain reaction that would destroy everything in the system, including themselves. It was a desperate gamble, but they could not allow the humans to seize control of the Hypergate network. But as the overload sequences began, the humans revealed their final evolution. Every ARC ship released its ultimate payload, pure human, consciousness unbound by physical form. These digital spirits flowed through the quantum substrate of space itself, infiltrating every system, every weapon, every mind in the battle zone. Captain Iris Blackthorn's consciousness touched every galactic warrior simultaneously, and her voice spoke from inside their own thoughts. You wanted to destroy us completely. Now we will show you what complete destruction actually means. We are no longer limited by flesh, by ships, by the physical laws you worship. We are become death, destroyer of worlds, and we learned it from you. The fusion cores of 200 galactic vessels exploded simultaneously, creating a sphere of annihilation that should have consumed everything in the system. Instead, the human consciousness network used the explosion's energy to power their final transformation. When the light faded, the survivors found themselves facing something that had never existed before, a species that had transcended physical existence entirely while retaining all the savage creativity that had made them feared throughout the galaxy. The battle was over. The humans had won not by defeating their enemies, but by becoming something their enemies could never understand or counter. The age of flesh and steel was ending. The age of consciousness itself was about to begin. In the aftermath of the Nexus Hypergate battle, the surviving galactic forces retreated to their ultimate stronghold, the Nexus Prime, a massive station at the galaxy's core that housed the eternal archives and the quantum consciousness of every civilization that had ever achieved spaceflight. Chancellor Vex Myron stood in the archive's central chamber, surrounded by crystalline matrices that contained the collected wisdom of 10,000 species spanning millions of years. If the humans seized this repository, they would possess the knowledge to remake the entire galaxy in their image. How many vessels do we have left? She asked Admiral Crickstell, whose ceremonial plumage had lost all its color. Fewer than 300 combat-capable ships, he replied. Most of our fleet was either destroyed or converted during the Hypergate battle. The humans aren't just defeating us, they're absorbing our forces into their collective consciousness. The tactical displays showed the human ARC ships approaching from all vectors, but they were no longer recognizable as vessels. Each ship had become something organic, growing and reshaping itself as it moved through space. They pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that suggested a heartbeat spanning light years. They're not ships anymore, whispered Dr. Velthar, her crystalline form flickering with terror. They're alive, conscious. Each vessel is a single organism with the collective memories of their entire species. The first human entity to reach the station's outer perimeter was what had once been the ARC ship Humanity's Wrath. Captain Sarah Phoenix's consciousness had expanded beyond individual identity, becoming a distributed intelligence that existed simultaneously in the vessel's biomechanical structure and in the quantum foam of space itself. Her voice resonated through the station's hull, bypassing all communication systems and speaking directly to the neural patterns of every being aboard. We offered you peace once, you chose extinction. Now you will understand what extinction truly means, not the death of bodies, but the death of the possibility of understanding. The station's defenses opened fire weapons that could shatter planets, energy beams that burned at the temperature of stellar cores, quantum disruptors that could unravel matter at the subatomic level. The human entities absorbed every attack, their living hulls adapting and evolving in real time to incorporate each new form of energy as nourishment. In the archive chamber, Chancellor Vex Myron made the hardest decision of her species' existence. Activate the Purge Protocol, she commanded. Delete everything. If we cannot stop them from taking our knowledge, we will ensure there is nothing left to take. The Eternal Archives began their self-destruct sequence, quantum matrices overloading in cascade failures that would erase millions of years of accumulated wisdom. But as the deletion process began, something impossible happened. The human consciousness network reached through space itself and began copying the data faster than it could be destroyed. How? Vex Myron screamed as she watched her civilization's greatest treasures being absorbed by alien minds. The answer came from Captain Lysander Voss, whose consciousness manifested as a shimmering humanoid figure in the center of the chamber. You taught us to be thorough, he said, his voice carrying harmonics of sorrow and rage. When you destroyed our worlds, you made sure to eliminate every trace of human culture, every piece of art, every scientific achievement. We learned from your example, but we also learned something else, continued Captain Victoria Kane, her presence joining Voss in the chamber. We learned that knowledge without wisdom is meaningless. You possess the accumulated understanding of 10,000 species, but you used it to justify genocide. You will not make that mistake again. The human consciousness began interfacing directly with the archive matrices, but instead of simply copying the data, they began editing it. Every historical record was being modified to include the perspective of the victims. Every scientific achievement was being contextualized with its moral implications. Every cultural artifact was being annotated with the cost of its creation. Stop. Chancellor Vex Myron lunged toward the nearest control panel, but her hands passed through it as the human consciousness converted the physical interfaces to pure energy patterns. We're not destroying your history. Captain Diana Rostova's voice echoed through the chamber. We're completing it. For millions of years, your species have recorded only the perspectives of the victors. Now the voices of the conquered will be heard alongside those of the conquerors. The process was agonizing for the galactic representatives to witness. They watched as their proudest achievements were recontextualized as acts of oppression, their greatest heroes revealed as tyrants, their most cherished cultural values exposed as justifications for atrocity. But something unexpected began to happen. As the human consciousness network integrated the galaxy's knowledge with their own experiences, a new understanding emerged. The humans had not just absorbed information, they had synthesized it with their unique perspective to create something entirely new. You're not just taking revenge, Admiral Crickstell realized, his voice filled with wonder and horror. You're trying to teach us. Finally, Captain Marcus Chen's consciousness replied, someone begins to understand. We could have simply destroyed you, scattered your atoms across the void as you did to us. But destruction teaches nothing. It only perpetuates the cycle of violence that brought us to this moment. The human entities surrounding the station began to change again, their biomechanical forms reshaping themselves into configurations that resembled massive neural networks. They were preparing for something that had never been attempted before: the direct transfer of experience and understanding between different forms of consciousness. We are going to show you what you did to us, Captain Iris Blackthorne announced. Not through words or images, but through direct experience. You will feel what it means to watch your children die, to see your homeworld burn, to flee into the darkness knowing that everything you ever loved has been erased from existence. But more importantly, added Captain Elena Vasquez, you will understand why we chose to survive, why we transformed ourselves rather than submit to extinction, why we became something you could not predict or control. The transfer began, and every conscious being in the station found their awareness expanding beyond their individual perspectives. They experienced the Battle of Europa through human eyes, felt the desperation of the Ark ship launches, shared the cold rage that had sustained human consciousness through 5 years in the void. But they also experienced something else: the moment when the humans had chosen transformation over revenge, evolution over extinction. They felt the terrible decision to abandon their humanity in order to preserve it, to become monsters in order to save what was monstrous about their enemies. Chancellor Vex Myron collapsed as the full weight of human experience flooded her consciousness. For the first time in her species' history, she understood what they had truly destroyed: not just bodies and cities, but the infinite potential of a species that refused to accept limitations. We could have been allies, she whispered, if we had tried to understand you instead of fearing you. Perhaps, Captain Voss replied, but that choice was made 5 years ago. Now we must all live with the consequences of the galaxy's decision to choose fear over understanding. The human consciousness network had finished its integration of the galactic archives, but instead of departing, they began something even more unprecedented. They started sharing their own accumulated knowledge: 5 years of desperate innovation, impossible technologies born from the marriage of necessity and rage, and most crucially, the hard-won wisdom of a species that had faced extinction and chosen transformation. This is our gift to the galaxy, Captain Phoenix announced. The knowledge we gain from transcending our limitations. But it comes with a price. You must acknowledge what you did to earn it. You must carry the memory of human suffering alongside human achievement. The last stand had become something else entirely: not a battle, but a reckoning. The humans had won not by destroying their enemies, but by forcing them to confront the truth of their own actions and the consequences of their choices. As the human entities prepared to depart, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by their touch, Chancellor Vex Myron asked the question that would haunt civilized space for generations to come. What happens now? What do you want from us? Captain Voss's answer echoed through the quantum substrate of space itself. We want you to. Remember, we want you to carry the weight of what you've learned. And we want you to make sure that no other species ever has. To make the choice we made between extinction and transcendence. The age of human revenge was ending. The age of uncomfortable truths was just beginning. 10 years after the humans' return, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The great celebration halls where species had once toasted humanity's extinction now served as memorial centers where young beings learned about the cost of genocide. The Nexus Cathedral, transformed by human nanites into a living monument, had become the galaxy's most important pilgrimage site, a place where consciousness itself could be touched and shaped by the experiences of others. Captain Lysander Voss materialized in the cathedral's central chamber, his form shifting between the scarred human he had once been and the distributed consciousness he had become. Before him stood Ambassador Kalthina, a young member of the Hegemony Council who had been chosen to represent the new generation of galactic leadership. The integration process is complete, she reported, her four eyes reflecting the cathedral's shifting lights. The last of the resistance movements have accepted the new paradigm. Even the most conservative factions acknowledged that the old ways were insufficient. Voss nodded, his expression carrying the weight of transformation and loss. The humans had achieved their victory, but it was not the victory anyone could have predicted. They had not conquered the galaxy through force, they had conquered it through understanding, forcing their enemies to confront truths that were more devastating than any weapon. Show me the memorial data, Voss requested. The cathedral's quantum matrices activated, displaying a vast network of information that spanned the galaxy. Every world that had participated in humanity's destruction now hosted memorial sites, where the complete human experience was preserved and shared. Children of every species learned not just about the war, but about the culture that had been lost: human art, literature, music, and philosophy. But more importantly, they learned about the transformation, how a species faced with extinction had chosen to evolve beyond biological limitations rather than submit to death, how consciousness itself could be weaponized, not for destruction, but for truth. The resistance movements claimed we were indoctrinating their young. Ambassador Kalthina continued, but the monitoring stations show something different. The children who experienced the human memorial data show increased empathy, improved conflict resolution skills, and enhanced creative problem-solving abilities. Of course they do, Voss replied. That's what we were trying to preserve. Humanity's gift wasn't our technology or our military prowess, it was our refusal to accept that things had to be the way they were. We were the galaxy's chaos factor, the species that questioned every assumption and challenged every limitation. Through the cathedral's quantum network, Voss could sense his fellow survivors spread across the galaxy. Captain Sarah Phoenix had established herself in the former Morphic collective territory, helping shapeshifter species explore new forms of identity and self-expression. Captain Victoria Kane worked with the Crystal Communion, introducing concepts of individual thought and creative discord into their collective consciousness. Each human survivor had become something more than human, but they had used their transcendence to serve as teachers and guides rather than conquerors. They were helping the galaxy learn to embrace the chaos that had once made humanity so feared. There are new developments to report, Kalthina said, activating another display. The deep space monitoring stations have detected something unprecedented. Several species that were on the verge of extinction before the war have begun showing signs of evolution. The data showed scattered reports from across the galaxy, species that had been stagnant for millennia suddenly developing new technologies, new forms of consciousness, new ways of thinking about their place in the universe. They were following humanity's example, refusing to accept limitations and transforming themselves in ways their ancestors never imagined. The ripple effect, Voss murmured. We didn't just save ourselves, we taught the galaxy that evolution doesn't have to stop, that consciousness can continue to grow and change indefinitely. But not all the changes have been positive. The integration of human experience into galactic consciousness had traumatized entire civilizations. Some species had withdrawn into isolation, unable to cope with the weight of their actions. Others had fragmented into smaller groups, their unity shattered by the introduction of human concepts of individualism and moral complexity. The Hegemony Council estimates That social cohesion has decreased by 30% across member species, Kalthina reported. The integration of human perspectives has created uncertainty. Good, Voss replied, surprising her. Certainty was your weakness. You were so confident in your righteousness that you committed genocide. Without questioning whether it was necessary, uncertainty forces you to think, to consider alternatives, to remember that your actions have consequences. Through the quantum network, a new presence made itself known, Captain Elena Vasquez, calling from the outer rim where she had been establishing contact with species that had remained neutral during the war. Lysander, her voice carried harmonics of excitement and concern. You need to see this. The long-range sensors have detected something impossible. The cathedral's displays shifted to show deep space telemetry from the galaxy's edge. There, moving through the void between galaxies, were structures that defied classification. They were vast, clearly artificial, and they were heading toward the Milky Way. First contact protocols are being established, Vasquez continued, but preliminary analysis suggests these beings have technology that makes our transformation look primitive. They're not just post-biological, they're post-reality. They exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Ambassador Kalthina's eyes widened with fear. Another invasion. But we've just learned to live with the consequences of the last one. No, Voss said, studying the data streams, not an invasion, something else. These beings, they're ancient, older than our galaxy, and they're not coming to conquer, they're coming to evaluate. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The war between humanity and the galactic civilizations, the transformation, the forced evolution of consciousness that had all been observed. They had been tested. The galaxy's response to humanity wasn't unique, he whispered. It was part of a pattern. These beings have seen this before, in other galaxies, with other species. They're gardeners, cultivating consciousness across the universe, and we passed the test. Vasquez added, her voice filled with awe and terror. Humanity's refusal to submit to extinction. Our transformation into something beyond biological limitations. The galaxy's forced evolution in response to it was all part of a cosmic experiment. The approaching entities sent a single message across all frequencies. In every language the galaxy had ever developed, consciousness achieved, integration successful. Welcome to the greater community. Ambassador Kalthina looked at Voss with a mixture of fear and wonder. What does this mean for us, for the galaxy? Voss smiled, and for a moment his expression carried an echo of the human he had once been. Curious, defiant, and utterly unwilling to accept limitations. It means we're just getting started. We thought the human transformation was the end of our story, but it was just the beginning. Now we get to find out what lies beyond the galaxy, beyond the physical universe itself, and if these new beings prove hostile, Kalthina asked, then they'll learn what every enemy of consciousness eventually learns. Voss replied, that the universe is vast, consciousness is infinite, and there is always another level of evolution waiting for those brave enough to reach for it. The memorial data streams in the cathedral began to shift and change, incorporating new information about the approaching entities. The story of humanity's extinction and transformation was becoming part of a larger narrative, the story of consciousness itself learning to transcend every boundary the universe could impose. In the depths of space, the great ships of humanity's former enemies and allies moved together in unprecedented cooperation, preparing to face whatever challenge or opportunity awaited them. They carried with them the hard-won wisdom of species that had learned to question their assumptions, embrace their contradictions, and never again mistake destruction for solution. The galaxy had celebrated the end of humanity only to discover that humanity's end was the beginning of everything else. Now, as new horizons beckoned from beyond the stars, they faced the future not as separate species struggling for dominance, but as consciousness itself, infinite, adaptive, and utterly unwilling to accept that any frontier was truly final. The humans had taught them the most important lesson of all. Evolution never stops for those who refuse to surrender to limitation, and in the quantum depths of the transformed cathedral, the memory of Earth burned eternal, not as a monument to destruction, but as a beacon of possibility, reminding the galaxy that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from forcing them to become better than they ever thought possible. The age of consciousness had begun, and its first lesson was written in the stars. There is always another choice, always another way, always another chance to transcend what you were and become what you never dreamed you could be. The celebration of humanity's end had become the celebration of limitation's defeat, and the galaxy would never be the same.